Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me tonight is former co-chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus, Seth Sturm. How are you doing tonight, Seth?
I'm all right. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to tonight. I'm glad to be doing shows again. There was some stuff in the news today that has me variously irritated. Mississippi has passed a trans ban that is as bad as any abortion ban in the country. They're threatening to take doctors' licenses for giving people care.
Yeah, they just had a bill like that come through West Virginia. I'm waiting for whether or not it's going to go all the way up to the governor's desk and whether he'll sign it or not. But they just introduced another one today here in this state that makes exposure to anybody, quote unquote, transvestite or anything transgender is exposing. If you expose any minor to those two things, then you're considered explicit, showing a sexually explicit material to a minor and subjected up to 5 years in prison. So just existing for trans people is about to become, a felony here in West Virginia. So, I mean, it's like open season.
Yeah, really, that seems very, it's the word I'm looking for, criminal, because you're criminalizing people's existence. That's not in any way the sort of thing that is supposed to happen in a democracy. That's the sort of thing that Nazis do, criminalizing people's existence.
Right. And this is the small government libertarian type people, supposedly, that are really making these pushes. Right. Because that's who's here in West Virginia. It's always these anti-establishment types, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. We had a legislator, Derek Evans, was one of the insurrectionists. He was caught going in on camera and was prosecuted for it. So, we have a long history here in West Virginia of standing up against the establishment, but then we're also leading the way in passing draconian Nazi genocidal laws targeting trans people. It's really disgusting.
Well, I've noticed that there's been I hate to use this word. It seems sort of disturbingly ironic under the circumstances, but there has been a transition in the way in what's become acceptable. A lot of things that everybody was up in arms about a few years ago have been made acceptable by repetition.
Right.
The bathroom stuff was roundly defeated, but it made it okay for a lot of people to express their bigotry. And then most of, not all of, Idaho passed a bill. There are other states that may come back to it now. But then you had the big round of no more trans women in women's sports. And people were pushing that everywhere. And that eroded at this idea of public decency even more, and advocated for more people to be more comfortable with their bigotry all over again. And so it's the same thing. And because they do that, they build up this acceptability as quote unquote free speech. The result is you think it's acceptable to debate the existence of whole groups of people, whether they should be allowed to exist. I mean, come on. That's not an acceptable topic for debate in the first place.
Right. And it's not just, it doesn't, the way I always viewed it is I always thought the bathroom bills were their first attempt, and they didn't go quite the way that people thought that it would, the people who were pushing those bills, because most people didn't see the urgency that they had there. But I felt like the sports thing kind of stuck a little bit more with people for some reason. I don't know if it's everybody loves watching sports, what it is that really got into people's minds on that one. But that one really stuck. That was the first thing here in West Virginia. That was the first ban that we saw go into effect. And one of the federal courts just upheld it. I'm guessing this topic will end up before the Supreme Court, but how's that going to go with the Supreme Court?
This Supreme Court is going to be fine with discrimination. I mean, I think we can all safely predict that this Supreme Court, because keep in mind, this is the same Supreme Court that was fine with a state putting bounties on abortion doctors.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to be in really, really big trouble, and especially the trans people out there that are just trying to live their lives, being criminalized, being targeted by this bigotry in a really nefarious way. Most of these people, I don't know if it's something that they really strongly believe or if this is just a way to rile up that bigotry in their base to get people back out to the polls. I don't know what's at the heart of it all, but I know that what they're doing is really
they strongly believe in eliminating trans people.
Yeah, it seems that way.
That's what it comes down to. It's like when people talk about how they want to abolish sex work, what they really mean is they want to get rid of sex workers.
True.
And what you've got with this whole debate, quote unquote, about trans women in bathrooms or trans women in sports or all these other ridiculous debates, you end up with this, well, we need to get rid of the trans people.
Yeah. And
when you're talking about getting rid of a whole group of people, what do you call that? You call that Nazism. And right. when people complain about folks being too woke, what they're doing is they're complaining about people opposing Nazism with all their voice.
Right. That's what they want us to stop doing. They want us to, I see this happening a lot in left spaces too, is like the transphobia is becoming more and more accepted. Ableism is baked right in. The way that white leftists, quote unquote, want to team up with those that are self-proclaimed Nazis. I heard somebody complaining that there was a Medicare for All march that didn't include the neo-Nazis, but on what planet do neo-Nazis really want to help? Do they want to provide healthcare for all people? They don't. They want to provide it maybe for themselves.
No,
but it's to further their own agenda of genocide, really.
Neo-Nazis have no interest in universal healthcare. Neo-Nazis have interest in excluding certain groups of people from healthcare entirely.
Right. So they can't be our allies if you're really fighting for inclusivity and human rights for everybody.
Well, because if you're religiously and aggressively opposed to abortion, then you're opposed to Medicare for all, because that means legalizing and paying for abortion for anybody who needs it.
Right. So that's the thing is so we have to accept the fact that there are people that are outside of the realm of politicians and cops and all these people that are known enemies. There are people out there that we can't align ourselves with because they are on Team Nazi. They would be happily cheering on any attempted extermination of these, pick your group of people that their base would be against. And that would be basically anybody who's not cis, white, heteronormative, and not, able-bodied. Somebody who's not a person living with disabilities. That's their goal, is to make everything homogenized and to attack anything that's different. And it's almost like this hasn't happened in the past. Like, we know the history of it. We know that they target these groups of people in particular in their rise to power, the Nazis in the last century. So why are we allowing it now? Why are we sitting back and saying, oh yeah, it's because, and to me, one of the things that always got me about this trans sports issue is the way that we just casually mentioned, well, yeah, clearly trans women will be better because women can't compete with men. So there's that element that just comes in through, and it's like, wait a second.
That's the whole irony of the whole thing. These so-called feminists who claim to be fighting for women are fundamentally embracing a misogynistic concept about sports advanced by men in order to avoid the potential embarrassment of not having to lose to girls. There's the very first woman to compete in international skating had to compete with men. There were no women's sports. Her name was Madge Sayers. She came in second in a world championship against 24 men. The winner was Ulrich Saukow, who is, if you've ever watched the Winter Olympics and heard them talk about a triple Saukow, this is the guy they named a skating jump after. So he's that good. They named something central to the sport after him. He was the best in the world. He came in first. Madge Sayers came in second. He gave Madge Sayers his gold medal and suggested that the judges had been prejudiced against her because she was a woman, and said that she had been the best skater and should have won. And the judges promptly changed the rules the next year so women couldn't compete because they felt that their objectivity had been called into question by the best skater in the world. And then a year after that, they created a women's division for the first time.
Right. So to me, this whole, and where is, I don't know, they act like there's some inherent integrity in all of our sports, which it's just not true. We have scandals in all of them, most of them.
So we have capitalist professional sports systems, which are horribly abusive. And we have a state national amateur sporting apparatus, which is itself full of abuses and crimes against athletes and the worst sort of sick people in positions of power. And then they turn around and they say, "Oh, but you've got to worry about the trans women, not the straight white guys in positions of authority all over the country."
Right. That's the real threat to the integrity of our sporting events. And it's so transparent to me.
Also to the safety of female athletes. Let's be clear about that too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So to me, that's always seemed to me, it's just like the bathroom debate. It's low-hanging fruit to get their foot in the door.
Yes.
So that they can start outlawing, they're going to start with, oh, well, we're trying to protect children. That's next. We're outlawing these procedures on children and then adults.
Well, again, Mississippi, take a doctor's license for providing gender-affirming care. Hormones, lose your license. Surgery, lose your license. Puberty blockers, lose your license. Anything.
Right. And this new bill that's coming in West Virginia, you get information to your transgender child about gender affirmation and the care involved with it. They're going to deem that sexually explicit material. You're going to risk, losing your kid, risk felony charges brought against you from the state just for providing life-saving treatment to your kid. This is insane.
What have national Democrats done when they had the Congress to do it? What have national Democrats done to protect women and trans people from abortion bans and trans bans?
When was the last time you heard a Democrat even talk about Roe since the midterms?
That's a good point.
I've not heard any.
But I mean, before the midterms, they had the chance to do something about Roe. They chose not to, so it would be a midterm issue. And they lost Congress, which means now they can't do it.
Well, it's perfect for them. Then they're going to be able to fundraise off of this in their mind.
Exactly.
One of the, kind of, I don't know if we're transitioning into the talk about Democrats, but one of the things that's been absolutely, I don't even know how to describe it, is I've been hearing so many Democratic strategists who say that we need to make sure that Trump is the nominee for the Republicans.
How did that work for Hillary?
Right. Like, you're going to do that again. This is what you think is a good idea, is to have that same exact formula where we have this guy who regular people embrace because he talks like them. he's, a lot of people carry the same bigotry that he has. It's a winning formula in a lot of these places. And when we run on the Electoral College, it's skewed heavily to places like Ohio and the Republicans in Pennsylvania and
but
Michigan.
Remember, these are the same people who made sure that Kerry Blake won the governor's primary for the Republicans in Arizona, and that Blake Masters won the Senate primary in Arizona. These are the same Democrats who interfered in Republican primaries to put the worst possible people on the ticket in the end. And while their strategy appears to have worked this time, and most of those horrible people lost, let's still remember we could have had Dr. Oz in the Senate. We could have had Blake Masters in the Senate. We could have had Herschel Walker in the Senate. These things only became possibilities in the first place because Democrats chose to advance these people in the Republican Party.
Right. And they do that because they know that they're not running on anything substantive. What have they done? What can they show that they've accomplished that's changed anybody's life? Not even just, you can't even say fundamentally, just at all. What have they done that's made an improvement in anybody's life that's felt? You got some numbers they love running on, but it's not felt by the people.
When you talk about what they've done that's improved people's lives, you have to go back to stuff like Social Security and Medicare. Now, how long ago was that now?
Wow.
And what's more, people like Biden seem to always be willing to compromise with Republicans about cutting it or privatizing it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Eventually, that's going to be what happens. That's the ultimate goal, is the privatization of everything that the government does, is because that's how you make money off of it. That's how you can make.
They're not going to privatize it if they don't think they can make money off of it. For instance, you're not ever going to see certain elements of the welfare state completely privatized, and they'll always exist in some form. But these people would rather that form be the Victorian poorhouse than any sort of system we have now.
Right. I mean, there's a disdain for people like that. They view them as not even, well, first of all, they don't view them as people most of the time. There's that sense, and that's kind of the way that bigotry plays into it, in that you make trans people not human. You make Black people not human, Indigenous people not human. You create these caricatures of them that they can then attack. And then, they don't have to treat people as people anymore because they're these ideas.
And then you pretend that the policies that you're enacting are only going to hurt the people that your target audience doesn't like. And actually your system hurts them too. Because let's be honest, it is not poor immigrants who are making it impossible for small business to compete with big business in agriculture or meat packing. It's the big corporations paying the coyotes to traffic labor because we maintain a criminalized labor force in order to give big corporations that advantage. But the small business person who is organized politically doesn't say, open the border, make all labor legal, get rid of the unfair big business advantage. No, the small businessman says, crack down on illegal immigration.
Right. And it's so subtle, because the people at the bottom, whenever they're hyped up by these demagogues, they're going off of these base emotional responses whenever the people who are giving them these lines, because it's well thought out. That's their ultimate goal, is to manipulate us into believing things that are, negative and hurt us.
This is good. And I'm glad that Paula Paul is bringing this up. This is why poor Appalachians are stigmatized as well. Those toothless hillbillies are easily seen as collateral damage. Yes. And let's also remember that poor hillbilly stereotype was created by artists in Looney Tunes cartoons who worked in New York City or Hollywood.
Right.
Who are drawing these caricatures of Midwest life that are not really based on the facts. One fact that I should point out is that the most famous hillbillies of all are the Hatfields and the McCoys. And this is where it becomes important to understand the difference between real poor Appalachians and the hillbilly aesthetic. The Hatfields and McCoys were local gentry. The Hatfields were the biggest slave owners in their county of Kentucky, and they lost it all because of the Civil War and the end of slavery after the Civil War. And the McCoys had been pro-Union guerrillas who had hunted down Confederate guerrillas like the Hatfields or some of their relatives. It had actually killed some relatives of the Hatfields during the war. And so this was a feud between two members of the local ruling class over politics and personal grievance. Because you have to understand, poor people don't have the resources to fight these private wars.
Right. You come to West Virginia for like a week, give anybody the chance to come here for a week and really get into knowing some of the people. You will find people living in abject poverty.
Yes.
Who have drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, of MAGA republicanism, and you'll find plenty of people who are bigots and who are hateful, everything negative that you could say. But you're going to find a ton of people who are the exact opposite, who would shock you. And that's what I'm always saying about. There's a history here in West Virginia, and I can't speak for every place. So some of the things that I talk about, kind of specific to us in this really small state. We have a small population. We don't have a lot of money flowing into our political organizations. There's a woman here, I've talked about her before on your show, on other people's show. She's able to do a lot with very little money. She gets $25,000, $30,000 into the party. She's a big shot now. So there's an opportunity in this place for, activists to make some headway. And we have this history here of being rebels. We're apt to say, this isn't working for us. We need something better. And so this seems to be a place where it would be good for people to organize, mobilize, focus on winning over the locals instead of just writing us off. Because if you talk, from Bette Midler's feud with Jim Justice I don't even know if you remember this, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe less. She was attacking all West Virginia because our governor's a lowlife. He's killed more people in Appalachia than anybody else living in Appalachia, probably. And so to attack us for having this guy who's already lording over us, using his wealth to hurt others that are living here, and just kind of skating by on his I'm a good old boy down home West Virginian attitude that he has, it's kind of harsh for someone who's living, like me, a leftist socialist in West Virginia, just trying to do anything to bring us back from the brink. We've got a mega majority. I don't even know what you call it. We've got like 11 or 12 senators out of 34, and a handful out of, whatever our House of Delegates. It's an even smaller percentage. So we have this GOP that's openly pushing these anti-trans bills that are extreme, even by anti-trans bill standards across the country, and they have no opposition. They'll be able to do anything that they want, given, if Jim Justice will sign the bills, which he most likely will. So we have serious problems, and to vilify us because so many people are I mean, Len, let's be real. They're too poor to be properly educated in the way that our political system works and who our political players are. Well, so it's no reason, if you see on the news that Joe Manchin is fighting for coal miners, and that's your main source of income, and that's the only thing
But let me ask a question. What percentage of working people in West Virginia actually vote? Because I don't know.
So I don't know the percentage. We have around it sits around 500,000 voters in the general election for a presidential year, maybe 500 to 600,000.
And that's in a presidential year.
Yeah, that's in a presidential year. I think, I didn't check the midterm numbers, to be honest.
What's the population of the state again?
I think we're under 3 million.
So when we're talking about 500,000 voters, we're actually talking about a relatively small sliver of the state's population, about a sixth, maybe. If we round up to 3 million, that's a sixth of the population.
Right.
If it's smaller than 3 million, then it's a little more than a sixth of the population. So sixth is a good number. That's pretty sad. So when we talk about who's voting in West Virginia, what are the odds if we have 500,000 voters actually voting in West Virginia in a presidential election, and in the presidential election year? What are the odds of a high percentage of those people being the rural working class?
No, I've never had to wait to vote at my precinct ever. I walk in, there's never a line. I'm surprised if there's anyone else in there. And I live in a really small area, small town. So I'm not expecting there to be large crowds, but just generally speaking, you don't see a lot of people voting. And when you talk to people about, because, that's kind of my job whenever I was the Indigenous Caucus co-chair, my job was to go out there and try to engage people in the public to get them, engaged in the party. And, I'm not a big party person, though I was a Democrat, am a registered Democrat. But the point is, I wanted to bring people into this to make our caucus something that was undeniably strong, because we kept being ridiculed and put down no matter how many members we were getting. So it was something where I would go out here and try to win people over, even in bigger towns in my county and in my area. I'm going out there reaching out to people, and nobody really wants anything to do with party politics, period. Even if what I'm doing is nothing to do with the party per se. I just wanted to build this diversity caucus so that we could get some, minorities out there. But
here are our official numbers. They're lower than we thought, less than 2 million. So we're still talking about a third of the population voting. So when we talk about West Virginia being a red state, what we're really talking about is 2/3 of the population that doesn't vote being held hostage by 1/3 of the population that does.
Those 2/3 don't see a reason to vote either, because when you're living here in a back run road that's dead end, gravel, potholes, and you don't have any money, you can't afford electricity, heating. So many people have wood burning stoves, and they're out there constantly chopping wood. They're calling their neighbors, calling anybody who has a fallen tree. They're in search of it constantly, because that's the only source of heat they have. They're hunting for food. That's here in West Virginia. That's not uncommon for people's main source of sustenance to be the food that they hunted or the food that they canned over the summer. We have some of the worst poverty in the country, hands down. That's demonstrably true. So it's not a wonder that our people aren't actively engaged in something as ridiculous as, electoral politics in their mind. They've got to worry about how they're going to eat, how they're going to heat their home, how they're going to get medicine to their family. This is real life stuff that they're worried about.
And for most of that, the state and federal government are not really there to help them in West Virginia. So why would they relate that to an election?
Exactly. And, whenever we were running, I was campaign manager for Mary Ann Claytor in 2016. And when we were running, one of the things that kept happening, especially everywhere that you go where there's impacted community members, any place where there are marginalized people, anytime that there's high rates of poverty, the people are hypercritical, and with good reason, because here's somebody coming in saying, I want your vote. And their question is always the same. Why would I offer my vote? First of all, when you get in, you're not going to come back here for 4 more years. And where are the other people that are with your party, or who are the other politicians that have come here and asked me for my vote, and where are they at now? Because our town is still not prospering. Let's put it that way. And that's the kind of thing that we're living with here, because the situation, the economic material situation of West Virginians continues to degrade. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. And our politicians aren't nearly taking it seriously enough. They're not doing anything that would result in economic changes for people. Jim Justice running around talking about we have a surplus right now. And they're also talking about ways that they can cut the insurance for the teachers and workers of the state. This is what we do here.
If you have a surplus, why would you need to cut the teachers and the state workers? Give them more money. You've got a surplus.
Exactly. But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to give even more tax breaks to the fossil fuel companies, the people who are stealing our natural resources.
But giving tax breaks to rich people is a fast way to turn a surplus into a deficit. Remember W on a national level? I mean, I'm not a Bill Clinton fan, but I mean, there was a surplus and a bunch of tax cuts for rich people and fossil fuel companies, and boom, it was a deficit before too long.
They're pushing it this session as well. They want to eliminate the state income tax. They want to make special rules for property tax, which aren't going to help people who own, their own home. That's going to be for big companies that own massive amounts of real property that they're not using.
How much farmland does Bill Gates own?
Right. Well, and if you look here in West Virginia, the natural resource companies own so much land, more than, I don't want to say more than, people, but it would be close. I would like to see the numbers. They own just so much land for their extraction needs.
I do have to ask, because I know he's also in Appalachia, and I know he has a horrible safety record. Has Jim Justice really killed more Appalachians than Don Blankenship?
Okay, that is a tough competition, and it's not a fun one. But I'll tell you this. This is why I say Jim Justice is uniquely bad. Jim Justice is responsible for these numbers are off the top of my head, and I researched it 6-7 years ago, whenever he was running, whatever that was. So Jim Justice is responsible for something like 66% of all mountaintop removal mining in Appalachia. Wow. So we're talking about thousands of miles of head streams lost, biodiversity just destroyed on these vast tracts of land.
When we're talking about lives lost because of the decline of lifespan because of pollution, Jim Justice is way up there.
Oh yeah, and not to mention the communities that are near these mountaintop removal sites. They're very impacted negatively with health conditions. And so this is what's interesting if you take a look at it. So Jim Justice switched parties at a Trump rally however many years ago. I think it was 2017. This was 1 week after the Trump administration killed a study that had been, I want to say, authorized by the Obama administration and had been studying data or collecting data for 5 or 10 years. I could have been 10 if Obama had authorized it and it was 2017, but those numbers aren't super important. They had been collecting data and they were at the point where they were finalizing that. They had spent over half of the budget on the study collecting the data, and they had a team put together to analyze and put the report on so that they could present it. And this is something that organizations here fighting mountaintop removal mining have been waiting for. They wanted that report that would definitively say, mountaintop removal mining causes this disease poses a health risk in this way, destroys the environment in this way, so that they could take it to a court and say, federal government found that this is actually killing us. Trump administration killed that study. 1 week later, Jim Justice is up at his rally, switching parties. Everybody celebrates.
I remember that.
You can see this corruption in real time. You can watch these people knowing their motives, knowing what they're about. And it just kind of doesn't register. I don't know. It's because, I don't know, maybe media doesn't legitimize that depth of corruption easily. They want to assume the best or not be in trouble for promoting the worst. I don't know what it is, but to me, you can see that. And that's something that that is the most visible way that you can see Jim Justice's corruption, because his removing that coal, it's something that is also really bad for workers. If you just take away the environment, he can remove per ton of coal. It's something like, I'm going to mess this number up. It's maybe I don't want to keep saying third, but I think it might be a third of the workers. So 2/3 fewer workers than what it would take to mine it traditionally. So you have every incentive to do that. And then if you look, he did this roads to prosperity thing a few years ago. And a few of the upgrades were areas around some of his mountaintop removal sites. It looks like he used this infrastructure money to make it easier for him to export his product.
And Joe Manchin thought that Jim Justice would be just a great Democratic governor.
Vice chair of the party, Danielle Walker, was just posing with Jim Justice on Martin Luther King Day, quoting Martin Luther King about unity and how refreshing it was to hear Jim Justice stand up for people, whatever it was. But I don't see how you can say that when the man is actively hurting so many people in Appalachia, in West Virginia right now.
Let's remember, we live in a bizarre mirror universe where the FBI quotes Martin Luther King on his birthday. I mean, I don't know if you can get more bent than that. The Portland Police Bureau on Martin Luther King's birthday, in celebration of this idea of Dr. King's birthday as a day of service. What are you doing for your community? It's like, well, we're not shooting, tear gassing, and beating them. I know that.
Right. We're doing the work. And I like to say you can judge people based on the quotes and how they portray Dr. King on the holiday. In stark contrast, I'm bashing the Democrats. Why am I a Democrat? Are there any good ones? Let me just say this. Mary Ann Claytor, chair of the Black Caucus in West Virginia here, shared a quote about the evils of capitalism from Martin Luther King on the holiday. So some people get it more than others, it seems. And that's what I like to see.
I hate to give MSNBC credit, but Lawrence O'Donnell, for his whole show, was running excerpts of interviews with Dr. King, excerpts of interviews with Richard Pryor talking about Dr. King in the 80s, really talking about how not very long ago that Richard Pryor conversation was, how not very long ago 1968 was, how all this is still not far away from us in a historical perspective. And it's like, so this is actually good. This is what people need to hear. And yes, Paula, we agree. You're going to have to come on the show with us one of these days.
Yes. Agreed. And because the thing is, too, is that the more people can see of the diversity, the real diversity in West Virginia, the more they'll be willing to accept that, hey, maybe this is a place that we should be putting some effort into. Whatever organization that is, at this point, I don't like outsiders really coming in. It's one of those things because so many people try to take advantage of us. Like I alluded to, you talk about wealth. Most of the money that we extract in our natural resources leaves this state immediately, goes away into bank accounts of people who are already very, very wealthy. So we're being robbed on a daily basis and being poisoned while they do it. There are a lot of people who see that. There are a lot of people who would be willing to buck that system and work towards building something new. And I just think that a lot of people write us off as being dumb hillbillies when there are a lot of people doing a lot of good work. I mean, there's even such a, I get into a lot of heated arguments with people, but there's so much diversity here, even on terms of people opposing the Democrats and Republicans, that we're able to have a very vibrant community of contrarians, if you will, people willing to stand up and fight back to where, it might not, where we always don't get along, but there are people here willing to stand up for LGBTQ rights. There are people here who are anti-racist, not just non-racist or whatever. They're actively working to make things better for minorities. And, that's the thing that people need to realize is that's who's here. And there are marginalized people stuck here. Yes. They're the most at risk. You talk about abject poverty, and people are probably picturing white folks living out in the hills, which is accurate a lot of the time. But there are also people who are LGBTQ, Black, Indigenous, Asian American, take your pick, living with disabilities in these places where accessibility isn't first on the menu. It's really difficult.
And if it's like Tennessee, a lot of those poor white people in the hills have disabilities too. When I lived in Tennessee, I wasn't in coal country, but I was really close to the Eastman chemical plant in Kingsport. Now, the Eastman chemical plant is so infamously dirty that they pay people to fish in their river, and they punish people horrifically if they hit one of the ducks that they bring in to keep on the company grounds to make it look like ducks live in the river. So this is, and this part of Tennessee has the highest rates of diabetes and certain kinds of cancer in the country. Is it just a coincidence that there's a chemical plant right there on the Holston River?
Right. I just read a thing today that eating one fish from wild caught from a stream or lake in most U.S. water systems is the same as drinking a month of toxic water tainted with forever chemicals. That's one piece of fish. And like I said, here in West Virginia, there are people who rely on the fish that they catch, the deer that they shoot, whatever it is. But a lot of times that fish is really vital in the summertime.
Of course.
You can't hunt and catch other game in that time period. So you're reliant on the fish that you catch. So there are people who are just taking in all of these heavy metals and these toxins from the, mine drainage. And that's what they have to eat to live. Yeah. And nobody's coming in to help them and save them from these toxic chemicals that they have to ingest every day just to survive. These are the things that people in West Virginia are dealing with. And it's not unique to West Virginia by any means. It's just what I can speak to. And so that's what we're really up against. And so, that's what we talk about with the hillbilly tropes.
So again,
ridiculous.
And even again, the hillbilly aesthetic is a quote unquote anti-authoritarian, which I hate to say because they're not an aggrieved minority. They're the local gentry, which is where I was going next. But the hillbilly aesthetic is this sort of weird anti-authoritarian chic whereby the local gentry cosplay as poor people. You see this on Duck Dynasty. You see this on all sorts of similar working class shows set in the South, where people pretend to have this working class, poor hillbilly aesthetic when they're millionaires.
You're describing our governor here in West Virginia, because like I said, that's his whole shtick is he comes in and tells people, I'm one of you, but I don't know. Did you just see him fly in his helicopter? I don't have one. I don't have a helicopter. I can't fly in anywhere. So he's not like us. Like, if people don't see that.
When you're talking about the hillbilly aesthetic, you're usually talking about these big rundown houses that look like they're in horrible shape, and everyone wants to say they're poor. Look at that horrible house. But that's generational wealth in a family where that house was paid off in somebody's grandfather's time. And any loans on it since have been straight equity to get a harvest through or something like that. And while they may be in various stages of debt, they're actually land rich.
Right.
And this is forgotten a lot. And and this land richness often makes them large scale employers in an area. And it's because they're large scale employers in the area that they can afford their trucks and their guns. And because their trucks and their guns are what they really care about and put their money into, they don't care that their house is falling apart. But they're not the poor.
No, there are so many people that's exactly what it's like. And here, I mean, it's getting to the point where in the area I live, where they've accumulated enough wealth to where they're like, you see people building really nice houses that have been, like you said, I mean, we'll go with it, hillbilly aesthetic living their entire life. And it's like they're finally in this place where they're, here in my area in Marion County, West Virginia, especially, I'm noticing it. There's like this whole, it feels like money has seeped in somewhere, but it's not going out to everybody. You got these towns, the county seat here, Fairmont, they've spent a lot of money. I don't think gentrification is the right word here in a place like this, but they've cleaned up, let's say, and now you've got, they've tore down a lot of old stuff and they've put in, a Sheetz, a Dunkin' Donuts, and they kind of corporatized the main street of the town. And people are so happy about it because they think that this is the town being cleaned up.
Well, it's like the town in North Carolina that Andy Griffith was born in, and that Mayberry and the Andy Griffith Show was based on, and that actually renamed itself Mayberry after Andy Griffith and the Andy Griffith Show years later. Mayberry, North Carolina is like one of the richest cities in North Carolina. These are folks who can afford to follow NASCAR, the whole NASCAR season, just drive around the country from race to race.
Right. No, there's the wealth that is in these places is often extreme. Where, yes. People do have, like you said, they've built up dynasties, to throw back to Duck Dynasty there.
Yes.
They really do have a dynasty, and they've made this money and they make that money work for them, and they get everything that their heart desires.
The reason we talk about coal barons is because they very often inherit their mines.
Right. And that's kind of the other thing here too, is that the people who are still making money living in West Virginia are often from, some lineage of the people who helped sell out the other people living in West Virginia or Appalachia at large. Because, there was this big push in the end of the 1800s, the carpetbaggers coming down in, and they confused people. It's kind of what they did with the Native Americans, where they have terms and these concepts that maybe aren't translating well. So they tell somebody, we've got this great deal. We're going to give you this money now to help you with whatever. You just got to sell us your rights to your minerals forever.
This is also where it's important to understand that history was written, even though it sounds really hard on the carpetbaggers. That history was written by the people who own all that stuff now. And it's really useful to remember that the terms carpetbagger and scalawag also went hand in hand with believing in things like black rights and the idea that the black folks in the state should vote too. It was carpetbaggers and scalawags that elected the first black senator in Mississippi. So when we talk about carpetbaggers and scalawags, it's really important to remember that the history of Reconstruction was in many ways written by the losers of the Civil War who won Reconstruction.
That's fair. And so, it's just taking that history into account, though, with West Virginia, it's important that people understand that, there is a lot of wealth still here. There are still people collecting from their ill-gotten gains,
definitely,
generations back. So, it's not like there's nothing but poor people in West Virginia. It's not like we're up against nobody. There are people with wealth. There are people who are willing to spend it. And
there are clearly 500,000 people in West Virginia who can afford to vote every 4 years.
That's true. That is true. And I would argue that is probably some of the reason why you don't have larger voter turnout. If we were to actually try to address the poverty in our state, engagement would go up. And I think that's universal across all of the states. I don't think that one's unique to West Virginia. But, that's one of the reasons why we have to actively, like, one of my main goals is to engage the people that I live nearby. I'm always saying that organizing is supposed to be local. The more people I get locally involved, the bigger our impact is going to be. and then if I, just get online and build a following or whatever it is that some people are more focused on, it doesn't translate to helping my neighbors, my people, and those that I can most impact in my surroundings. So, to me, it's always about going as local as you can and affecting the most change that you can on whatever level it is.
Well,
so, people build that up, but I think you have to start here.
What was it Tip O'Neill said? Now, obviously, he was talking about a different kind of politics, but Tip O'Neill famously said all politics is local. So we need to apply that to our organizing. It's important to organize on a local level. One of the fundamental principles that we should be following is the model of neighborhood organizations and vigilance committees that you see both from the various abolitionist groups in Boston before the Civil War and from groups like the Black Panthers during the 1970s. That's the sort of organizing that we should be thinking about, organizing for mutual aid and mutual defense.
Right. That's because those things actually will help people. And I think that's something that so many politicians especially have forgotten, that, I don't know, maybe it's Republicans and the right wing has really tainted the idea of the government being anything other than the management of the finances of the country, or whatever, they want us to be. There's been that lack of support for people. And so if we want to start winning those governmental seats, if we want to start winning elections through third party or even dark horse Democrat, as I always push for, but if we're going to build a strong third party, if we're going to push anybody who's not the establishment into these positions of power, you're going to have to build up a base locally of people who actually support them. This idea that we're going to be able to organize online completely is just, I don't think it's proven to pan out.
So let's talk about Twitter. Let's talk about Twitter a moment, because Twitter is a good example. Before people started leaving left and right because of Elon Musk, there were maybe 3 million active users on Twitter tops. Now, that's not a huge slice of the American population. That's not, in order to organize effectively, you'd have to organize everybody on Twitter, and that's not going to happen. I don't do what I do on Twitter because I think I'm going to effectively organize a movement online. I do what I do on Twitter because I want to advertise this show, advertise the writing I try to do, and educate people about what's happening while arguing with what I would call bad theory or false consciousness. And with all that in mind, you're not ever going to organize online the way that Tunisia organized a revolution on Twitter back in the day. That's a different time. However, you can use Twitter to get your message out to like-minded people, promote each other, and get people talking to each other locally. Twitter can be used and other social media can be used to connect people who otherwise wouldn't talk, and to have media like this to try to get the truth about people's experiences out there. Because the truth of our experience is not on MSNBC every night. If it were, I wouldn't be talking about what a great exception to the general rule Lawrence O'Donnell's show was. Because he's done a lot of garbage shows about Trump, too.
No, I agree. And I didn't mean to make that sound like a negative thing when I was saying it.
No, I know.
I'm just saying that, there's that aspect of it. But when we're actually talking about organizing, winning people over, it takes a lot more than that, was all I was trying to say.
Exactly.
Because, the internet played a really key role in our 2016 campaign. That was where we broke the glass ceiling in regard to race in West Virginia, in my opinion anyway. That's where Marianne Clater and she won the first statewide contested race. It was a primary, but it was still the first statewide contested race for an African American. And we did it with a budget that was like a tenth of what the other guy had. I mean, it was crazy. And the reason we were so effective was we had made a series of videos with Marianne speaking to the camera, talking to voters as she would anybody else. And we put those on Facebook, and we had the ability to really target our audience. And if you compare prices of advertising, especially political advertising at the time, and even now, the price is ridiculously low for what it was at the time. But after 2016, with the whole Russian disinformation stuff that they said, talked about, that's what really drove the election home. So they got in a lot of heat. So they really, really cut the ability for people to target effectively.
And yet now we're finding out, according to all the experts, that, oh no, there really wasn't any big impact by Russian disinformation in 2016.
Right. We spent, I think it was $500, and we reached 109 or 100. It was about 110,000 people with a Facebook post that was basically a commercial.
Yeah.
For $500, we could run maybe an ad on Prime, during the 5 o'clock news or something on one of the channels. That kind of reach enabled us to get into people, and the targeting that was available at the time was, not fantastic, but for our needs, it suited them perfectly. And we were able to win with less money because of that ability to get into people's homes. They've destroyed that basically because they don't want people to be able to get into your ears, into your minds without being able to pay for it. And that's one of the consequences of this whole Russian scare, is that regular people are having a harder time running for office or doing whatever it is that they're trying to do and reaching people in their communities, because social media companies have decided that, well, we don't want to be responsible for changing anything out there unless the government wants us to, and then we're going to work with them to silence whatever story it is, But it's the point is that they don't have that same kind of respect for regular people. They want to cut our ability to reach others with our message, and it boils down to money basically, because I guess they view it as if you have enough money, then you're what's the word I'm looking for? You're respectful enough.
That's why you see Elon Musk selling access to essentially fake blue checks for $11 a month in order to make it easier for certain kinds of people to spread disinformation.
Because they're incentivized. They show up first on, if any post goes viral, just go to an Elon Musk post and scroll down, and you're going to see blue check mark, blue check mark, blue check. These are people who paid to show up at the top of the algorithm, which that doesn't benefit the working poor who may be trying to organize on Twitter. So that's the whole point, is like they've gutted that ability for us to properly find and reach out to people without having some sort of knowledge, it seems. So if somebody knows to come follow me, or if they know what to search for and they happen upon me, maybe, but I'm not going to be able to raise enough money to effectively run an ad campaign on any of these platforms anymore. And I'm definitely not going to be recommended by the algorithm.
And this is important.
Oh,
you could not get a broadcast TV ad for $500 in 2020. This is very true. Television spots are expensive, and the higher income the media market, the more expensive they are. So if you're running in Chicago, then keep in mind that you're not running in your district, you're running in the Chicago media market. And the Chicago media market is huge, which means you're in trouble. You're not going to be able to afford spots that your opponent is going to be running.
And that's what killed us in the general in 2016 was, I don't want to say it was just that we kind of ran towards the end of our money. And I think we had reached as many people as we could reach on Facebook, to be honest, at that point. And this guy was running ads every single day at some of the prime spots, 12 o'clock news, 5 o'clock news, the soap operas, Wheel of Fortune, different channels where there's different demographics I know I just listed 2 shows that are mostly old white people watching, but they were doing everything, and like you couldn't stop from seeing them, because I would keep the channel on just to see, oh, there's another JB ad, just to get a feel for how much advertising was going on, and it was a lot. And and then on top of it, in 2016, when we did have enough money to run a few TV spots, I mean 7, 8 of them tops. So we're really trying to pick the best time slots for us. And each time that we would try to get a prime time slot, either in the 5 o'clock news or in like, maybe a popular TV show, they would mess up and run our ad at some obscure hour and then just give us a credit back. We'll run your ad another time at the 4 o'clock in the morning news. But I'm like, that's not what I paid for. And I don't think we ever got a primetime spot, despite having scheduled and paid for them on multiple occasions.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And I want to bring this up. When you've got people paying for blue checks, yes. If you've got somebody who's working like the rest of us, paycheck to paycheck to pay the bills, who's got a blue check because they ran for office, that is being suppressed by all these fake blue checks that people are paying for. And that does actually undermine people's ability to express themselves. It's not free speech. It's commodifying reach for the benefit of people willing to pay to get their message out.
Right, because the blue check was originally just supposed to be, this person is who they say they are. They're at risk of, maybe having fake accounts made. So
the blue check was originally, in theory, supposed to be open for anyone who met the necessary criteria to apply for. They then suspended that at some point before I ever joined Twitter, and began a process of ruthlessly only issuing blue checks to the people they decided were the elite. That's why there are a lot more media people without blue checks than with them.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense, because whenever, like I always go back to, this was my main campaign. Whenever we did Marianne Clater, she made her Twitter in 2016. And, I was unaware of anything to do with Twitter, never used Twitter in my life. So I said, how do we get one of these check marks? Because, you're running for public office. You're the nominee now. It was after she got the nomination. I'm like, we need to get one. And that's when I found out they just that was at the point when it was just we'll let you know if you get one. And so they just kind of always seem crazy to me. Like, there's a certain, I don't want to say a certain class of people, but there are public figures who, I don't want to say deserve, but we all deserve. They deserve it, and we deserve to know who the real accounts are. And this paid blue check mark, anybody who has $11, like I knew a guy who was trust fund kid, really troublesome, internet troll deluxe. Alex, if he's out there, I don't know. If he's out of prison, he might see this. Hey, Alex. And he is the type of guy, he would pay $100 a month if it meant people would see his stuff. Okay. So it doesn't mean that it's quality. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that you have the money to pay Twitter, and that's all that they care about on top of it too. So it doesn't do anything to advance public discourse in a beneficial way. It's like you said, commodifying speech or the people who are willing to pay a private company for the privilege of popping up in people's feeds first. I mean, that, oh, by the way, is really high levels of privilege when you want and are willing to pay that much money just so that you might show up in people's feeds a little bit higher.
So this raises a good question. If you're a legitimate independent media person, is the $11 an hour a legitimate business expense for what you're doing, or is that contributing to the problem?
That's 2 separate questions. So in terms of ethically, morally, I don't think that you should pay the $11. Like me personally, I would have a problem giving Twitter as it stands, especially as it stands now, any money whatsoever,
Of course.
So that's where I stand. But at the same time, if this is one of your major ways to reach people and you're impacted by not having the blue check mark, and the $11 draws people in just so that your message gets out to a wider audience. There are other people already paying the $11 who are putting out a lot of bad information. So I'm not going to hate on somebody willing to pay the $11 if they're putting out content or they're whatever it is that they're trying to do is actually beneficial. If they're just one of these guys, I saw somebody had tweeted out something that was like one of these accounts, blue check mark, and every tweet is something like breaking news, Elon Musk destroys Chinese government was one of them. Just these ridiculous things that are meant clearly some sort of clickbait to try to make this person's account bigger, whatever their end goal is. That's a waste of money. That's a waste of everybody's time and energy. And, that's what we're up against basically now. And so I don't know. It's one of those things. I'm not going to judge anybody willing to pay the $11. Just for me personally, I wouldn't want my $11 going to this company.
I'll be honest, is I do feel suppressed sometimes. And the show pays for itself right now, and there's enough left over that I could put some of that into the $11 a month for the blue check mark if I really wanted to. And at the same time, I really don't want to give Twitter any kind of money. But at the same time, I know that I don't have the reach that I feel like I should.
Especially because you've got a lot of followers too. So that's what always kind of blows my mind is like, I have 200 followers. If I make a tweet and it's seen by 50 people, okay, but whenever I see like somebody with, an account with your status, because now that they've got that view count on there, it's like, you can watch these accounts and say, this person is clearly not getting the same amount of reach that these other people are seemingly getting. And I don't know whether it's the Twitter blue. I don't know. Maybe the accounts that have followed them have liked it. It goes into more people's feeds. I'm sure there's some of that variation, but you can see a kind of a pattern form on certain accounts where they're going to have, maybe their likes are this number and the views are only 5 times the number of likes. And you're like, well, this guy down here has got 10 likes, but it's been seen 1,000 times. So that's 100, whatever. My math's fuzzy whenever I start doing math, but you get it. It's like, there's a discrepancy there that you can see. And I mean, if anybody were able to track it well enough and long enough to prove something, I'd be interested to see it. I'm just not that person that's able to do something.
No, I'm interested in what other people feel like they're experiencing. And yes, Connor, this is where I was going to, as I've thought about it to see if it does increase my reach or not. The thing is I really don't want to give Twitter any money, like I said.
But what if you just did? I mean, okay, so it's kind of that thing too, because it's like you break your word on this one. I get it. You feel like it's you've made a statement. You want to make a statement. But I'll tell you this. There's this journalist I follow who's originally from Appalachia. I can't think of their name right now. But the whole thing was they made this big stand a couple months ago that they were leaving Twitter. And they did it. But a couple weeks ago, they came back and said, nobody else left Twitter. I thought we were making this big move to this other social platform. I thought we were done with Twitter. We're not done with Twitter. So I have to come back because that's where I'm going to reach people. So if you have the money, you can make this argument and justify it easily. And like I said, I don't think that it's just I mean, there's something real to be said for this. If you're able to fight back against the misinformation, the bad information, the right-wing bigotry, all of the bad stuff that's out there from the people willing to pay the $11, pay it. I don't know. That's where I'm at. It's like $11 ultimately is a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, but see, I really get where Connor's coming from here.
Right.
I really don't want Elon to get my money. I really don't want the Saudis to get my money. Let's not forget the Saudis' big share of Twitter. The Saudis are still the biggest owners of Twitter, regardless of whether Jack or Elon or some other American billionaire is running things. The Saudis are still the biggest owners of Twitter.
Couldn't we make the argument, though, too, that an account like yours, especially, that gets a lot of engagement, keeps people on Twitter longer? You're already benefiting Elon if you go that route, right? So there's the argument to be made that just your content production and your engagement on the platform itself benefits the larger company and their bottom line and their ability to say, this is how many users we have, this is what they do, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could interpret it. And yeah, cash directly to the company really seems to be a line that I've not bought the check. I do a lot of stuff for a show that doesn't even get made on a regular basis that Marianne Clater and I do. We've done once so far, but I keep the website up because the day's going to come where there will be a story that only we will tell. And I want to have that infrastructure there. And it's not, it's not super cheap, but it's not super expensive either. And it's a cost I'm willing to take on. So I kind of view it the same way. I mean, I get it. You don't want to give Elon your money, but you've got something that is beneficial to people. And so you have to me, it is. I would weigh that $11 versus what you're bringing to the people. So is that $11 that you give Elon and Twitter going to make that much of a difference versus if your reach goes up? Now, if it doesn't, that's another topic of conversation. But if you're reaching more people and impacting more people and they're sharing it more and you're building a bigger community right here with Twitter's network against them, then you could argue that your $11 isn't going to benefit Elon in any way. You're actually subversive in your approach. So you're giving him the $11, but ultimately you're working to bring him down. So
now this
it's
is
really
funny.
how you perceive it.
I wonder what would happen. Paul, this is Paula. I wonder what would happen if I started paying Twitter $11 a month for my blue check. It might fry their servers. Now that might fry their servers. I would be curious to see, and I understand that Paula may not be the best person for this experiment because she's not in the best economic place right now. She's living to paycheck to paycheck the same way I am. But if somebody really thought about it, I'd be very interested in seeing if somebody with a legitimate blue check who started paying $11 a month got a bigger boost for their anti-capitalist content or not.
See, now that's the thing. So does the blue check for someone like Paula carry that same preference, let's say, that Twitter gives to the paid check marks? So we know that paid check marks end up higher up in people's
in my purely anecdotal observations of Paula's account on Twitter, it seems like Paula is being suppressed by the algorithm in some way.
I definitely
simply based on the engagement that I know she used to get. And that can't all be because so many people on Twitter really love the Democrats or really love Nick more than they love Paula. That's not how it works. Twitter is all about personalities. People who really love Paula are going to really love Paula.
Right. Yeah. No, I've noticed that with her account especially too. And I don't know what would trigger it. And I know a lot of people say I'm being suppressed. But the thing about algorithms and content is it's completely, it's not like somebody's sitting there going through tweet by tweet saying, let's knock this down a few. Let's knock this down a few. It's just that it's a weighted thing, And so somebody who's, to use the word subversive again, somebody like Paula, who's really calling out people, the establishment, those keywords hit something in a computer somewhere and they say, this is a topic that we don't want to see so much of on our platform. Let's put it down a little bit. So I think that's what people need to understand. It's not necessarily that people were even targeted by real people so much as you're just victim to the idea wars that go on in this country. And that's what is being suppressed is ideas really. And I think that Paula is just somebody who happens to be speaking a lot of truth that triggers a lot of different.
And I think that people who speak more truth have always been more suppressed on Twitter than people who speak less truth.
Again, I've only been on Twitter for like a year and a half. So to me, it's like everything's fresh, but I get it.
I can explain this. He was a Trump reply guy. He was a Trump reply guy at a time when Trump's account was huge. Trump's account was like one of the biggest things pulling people to Twitter. Everybody thought Trump was funny. Whether you agreed with Trump or not, you probably followed his account. Lots of people liked Trump's tweeting who didn't necessarily support him politically, at least for a while. And so there was all this stuff. And because there was all this stuff, it was really easy for someone to become popular with an anti-Trump base by replying consistently to Trump's tweets.
There was a whole thing that at the time, like in 2016, 2017, that came out about what you're talking about, the phenomenon of people who would watch for Trump to tweet. And it was their goal to be one of the very first accounts to reply something back. And they would have a canned set of tweets ready to go, like,
and that's how
response for everything, just so that they could be right there and then.
That's how Jeff Tiedrick became popular, doing that in 2016 and while Trump was president. That's also how Brooklyn Dad got popular. Brooklyn Dad was a guy defying a child support order before. That's what the defiant in his handle means. He was in defiance of a child support order.
He's honest, though, you know.
But now he's a big Clinton guy,
right? And he's paid. Wasn't it revealed that he was paid by? Was it either the DNC or
he's paid? Well, he was paid through all these. So the DNC gave so much money to PAC X, and PAC X gave so much money to PAC Y, and PAC Y paid money to all these influencers on Twitter, and he was near the top of the list.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. But either way, he's being paid. That's what gets me, is like, you're not just being paid through the content you're creating. You're being paid to create that content with a specific bias baked right in. So it's propaganda. It's paid propaganda by, whoever paid for it.
But it means power. It means you join the club. These approved trolls are closer to the club than you and I will ever be.
I sometimes get to go in the clubhouse for a minute.
Well, sure.
Yeah, no, they've never even begun to accept people that are on the outside. They shun us. The second that you question their motives, their integrity, or anything, you're out.
This is why I don't think it's going to happen within the Democratic Party. This is why I think we need a real party that is sincerely devoted to public issues. And by public, I mean the people. I mean the proletariat. I mean the disabled, the working class, racialized people, the poor, everybody who really depends on the state in some way for that extra bit of help that was supposedly the promise of the New Deal to our grandparents. And so with all that in mind, we need a party that represents those people and not the professional bureaucracy who are represented by the Democrats, or the big property owners who are represented by the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. It's for me, it's really, I have diametric positions in my own head, because for me in West Virginia, I see the opportunity. Like, if I don't,
of course,
if I don't get involved in what I feel that I am strongest in,
let me ask you this serious question. How much have you really benefited from working within the Democratic Party up to this point?
None. Me personally, I've benefited. I have taken hits because of my association with the Democratic Party, both from the left, from people who are like rightfully calling me out for even associating with the Democrats, because I get it. Trust me, I get it wholeheartedly. And I get it from the people who are the traditional Democrats that want to know why I'm involved in the party in the first place. Both groups can't seem to understand that. It's just, to me, my strong suit has always been kind of not stirring the pot just for the sake of stirring it, but asking questions. Like, I went to a Christian school. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but it was really it was an independent, fundamental Baptist Christian school.
Sure.
For whatever reason, my grandfather wanted to send me to it, and my parents agreed. So I ended up going there. And let me tell you, that was a unique experience for me, because that was the place where I learned to question authority. I was one of the only people there that on a regular basis was asking why. Like I was always in trouble, always in the principal's office. And it was always for the same reason, because I questioned somebody. It wasn't like I was this bad kid, bad teenager, or anything like that. It was just asking questions like, one time I got in trouble for sitting in the wrong place during chapel. It wasn't my assigned seat. And they said that was just disrespectful. I said, well, you all saw me sit in this other seat and nobody said anything to me at the time. It was like, you festered on it. You started thinking about it and you wanted a reason to be mad. You wanted a reason to lash out. It's a simple example, but that was always the kind of thing. It was that was a big deal. That's spiritual probation. You got to have a meeting with the pastor every week because I dared question the pastor. So, it wasn't about my spiritual guidance. It was about disrespecting the preacher there. So, so that's kind of where I got that whole thing of just like people with these positions of authority, they really don't have all the answers. They're fallible. They're people. And sometimes you got to have somebody to come in and just ask the most basic questions because they don't have the most basic answers. And so somebody has to expose that. And so for me personally, I find that I'm more beneficial to go into the West Virginia Democratic Party as that kind of catalyst for change, hopefully, to get people to open their eyes and see that, we just had this shift. We had the change in chairs and we went from one basically corporate Democrat who did everything that she was told from the National Party to another more progressive Democrat who does everything he's told by the party and is corrupted by the same capital.
Exactly.
So but they've got this change where they're all of these young, especially young white people that are leftists, desperate for something in this state, latch onto them. So there needs to be somebody willing to, from the left, come at them and say, listen, you might be better than a Republican in some regards, but what you're doing is detrimental. Well, and here's why. So I think that we need to have a strong third, there's a mountain party here, and they're doing a lot of good work. I don't not support them in what they do by any means. It's just that my position and where I think I can do the most good is within the Democratic Party for now.
I learned something that I think is important in 2020 and 2022, the two elections. In 2020, I worked with a lot of candidates running as socialists in Democratic primaries. I did a lot to help them on Twitter. I did a lot to promote them. That was how I got my following to a great extent, was promoting a lot of these candidates. And in 2022, I promoted a lot fewer candidates. And the reason was because none of them were allowed to win anything in 2020.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's what I've been doing since, 20 whatever years ago. And that's what is consistently the same thing. And then those people who do win, 9 times out of 10, will absolutely betray all of the values that they ran on and become the thing that they were protesting against 5 minutes before they took office. Okay. That is all true, but now, it doesn't mean that you don't try, I guess. I don't know. I don't have all the answers.
I cannot endorse violence, but would this just not be poetic in its justice? I might, but maybe after Elon is turned into chum by the Saudi secret police for screwing up Twitter's profit margin. Now the good news is that Twitter, well, for Elon, not the good news for us, maybe, because that sounds like a great idea. The good news is Twitter has probably never been terribly profitable.
Well, a lot of the value in Twitter comes from the ability to control the discourse and suppress information. I mean, if you're in control of that, you've got one of the greatest tools of propaganda in your belt. I don't know, and whatever tool you take.
And that's one of the biggest reasons that I don't leave. I don't really want to give up control to these folks.
Same reason I stay a Democrat is because I'm already a thorn in their side. They know me. To run away would just be pointless at this point. I mean, people can.
But I really
say what they want.
I really believe, and this is important, I really believe that in 2016, that the biggest thing Bernie Sanders had going for him was that he wasn't a Democrat. People hear Democrat and they shut off.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
The majority of independents hated Hillary Clinton and considered her to be corrupt. Because let's face it, she was. And the specific charges that the Republicans made were not the sort of things that people could be convicted on, precisely because politicians don't want to hold other politicians accountable. They want to fling dirt.
That's why I will be surprised if anybody brings an indictment against Donald Trump.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you indict a former president, you've opened up the floodgates for the possibilities because they're all criminals.
We've still got Clinton, W, and Obama out there with things they could be indicted for.
Right, and that's
there's no statute of limitations on killing an American citizen and his 16-year-old son with a drone. That's murder. There's no statute of limitations on that. If we're charging Donald Trump with a crime, what's to stop us from charging Obama with a crime? Or
that's one of the reasons why I've always been out here saying, let's go after Trump. I just don't think it's ever going to happen. I want them to go after Trump. That would be amazing to see that just for even a second.
I've always wanted him.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen. I don't have that faith in the system whatsoever because I know the system is made to oppress and it's not there for justice for everybody, for sure. It's there for a select few.
And this is why we need to have a party that actually represents working class interests, which the Democrats will never be as a party.
No,
because they won't. The money in the Democratic Party is dependent on millionaires.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The donors are what make the party. And you see, I probably will get in trouble eventually for saying this, but my ultimate goal and what I think the Democrats' only role moving forward really is in terms of changing things is we just have to have enough people who are willing to support the third parties becoming institutionalized, so to speak. Right now, the two parties, through laws that are written, have a stranglehold on the power, on the political power in this country. So we've got to have people in both parties willing to say that more competition is a good thing. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I really don't. But to me, that's what it's about. Is like, so for me as a Democrat, having a Green Party, a Libertarian Party, more.
Well,
no party.
So here's my problem. The Green Party is still not a public party. The Green Party is still a party of not everybody, obviously. Howie Hawkins is a Teamster. His running mate in 2020 is a Teamster. There are working class people in the Green Party, but the Green Party is for the most part a party of well-off white professionals. It's also dependent on millionaire support and even to some extent corporate donations because, that's where the money is.
Yeah. There's a fundraising playbook, basically. If you're involved in politics, the donors are the same, the lists are the same. It's just a matter of which one you get, basically, because it's all coming from the same people. I mean, that's why Open Secrets, when you go look, the biggest donors, it's not just one candidate, it's lots of candidates across all the elections because their power comes from having influence with all of these different politicians. One person is only good for one thing.
Like the biggest donors to Hakeem Jeffries, our esteemed Democratic Party congressional minority leader. His biggest donors are 4 pro-Israel PACs and Comcast employees.
Mm. You know, so like the employees thing has always thrown me for a loop, because you can't it's one thing, you know, it's like you want to say that it's like the employees, but at the same time, what's caused so many employees? And like, are they the executives? Are they the
So
linemen?
here's the thing. This is the question you have to ask every time you see employees listed. You have to think, okay, who are the employees at this company?
Right.
So with this in mind, you have to be able to look and see who actually benefits from what.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree, but that's, I don't know. Plus the other thing, you know, it's like we got to have Democrats who support third parties. You got to have Republicans who would support third parties. You're going to have people that support getting money out of politics too, which is like, going to me, that's even a harder sell, because they just like, it's so corrupt. That's what that's what most of them are there for.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people support if we're not organized to demand it.
Hey, that's good. Yeah.
So, yes, we need to have people who support taking money out of politics. In order to take money out of politics, we have to be able to organize around the issue of money in politics in a way that scares people into believing they will lose their seats if they don't support getting money out of politics. And suddenly it's much harder than it sounds. Do you know how the right to vote was actually passed in Congress? There was a huge one-issue movement that only cared about the right for women to vote and nothing else. And by this, we mean white women. Let's not forget that. But the only thing they cared about was passing a law allowing women to vote. All they cared about. So Republicans, Democrats, they would support them if they supported giving women the right to vote, which meant there were a whole lot of people in office who had promised that to support women's rights to vote and who owed people for their votes, because that was the way the system worked in those days. You owed people for your votes, and if they didn't get a return on their vote, you would lose for re-election. The women's movement expected every one of the politicians that they gave their time to would vote yes on any suffrage bill, and they would punish people who betrayed them. Those people would lose their support. So I ask you, if Democratic Socialists of America were to be taken seriously, would they have not actually punished Jamal Bowman for his support for Israel?
That's the key to me with a lot of these organizations. You're going to put out a list of endorsements, these people that you support, and you have a platform. If they go against your platform, you owe it to your members who support your organization to be honest with them. There was a whole thing here in 2018 in West Virginia. There was a group. I don't want to get into the names of the groups. I'm sure some of them are still operating poorly, but some of them, whatever. The whole point is they had done questionnaires for the people running for office, and they would only endorse if they answered the questionnaire. But then the person who answered it could decide whether or not they wanted to make it public. And to me, how am I going to trust any organization who puts out a questionnaire with these things that are about the platform of the organization, but then won't share that information with the general public? How do I know that those people said what you want them to say? And if they're not willing to say it publicly here, why would I expect them to stand up for it publicly on the House floor, on the Senate floor?
And that brings me back to the public and private positions of Hillary Clinton. So how many other Democrats of that stripe have public and private positions? It seems like a lot these days, because we're not we're not seeing the kind of large-scale mobilization of voters on behalf of these things we should be. We're seeing attempts to peel off Republican votes.
Oh, I mean, like I say, I always relate everything back to West Virginia, but you could see that so clearly here. Like when Joe Manchin ran for re-election, one of the things that one of the flyers they put out for the general election was about how he voted 94% of the time with Trump. And like, I get it that you want to win that seat, the general election, it's happening. So that's the low hanging fruit. That's the easy way to get votes, is because people know Joe Manchin. You already know a ton of Republicans are going to switch over and vote for him anyway. So you reinforce that and you encourage others to do the same. But the reality is there are so many, like you said, people who aren't voting, who have given up that Joe Manchin's ever going to do anything for them because they've seen what Joe Manchin does in office. They've seen what he's done since taking over. When did he? 2010 was.
Then let's look at what happens when somebody runs against these party leaders. When somebody runs against Joe Manchin, the whole national and state Democratic Party aligns against them.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
they'll even punish them for running against Joe Manchin by supporting the Republican.
Right. Even okay, so it's just like anybody who has these, especially in West Virginia. There's a lot of corruption and cronyism going on here. So, like, look at Paula Jean Swearingen. She ran against Shelley Moore Capito in 2020. The unions, the coal mining unions, endorsed Shelley Moore Capito. She does not have a record of standing up for miners. She has a record of standing up for coal mine owners, Well,
but then the owners,
the exact opposite.
But this is why you have to look at the industries where employees donate to candidates, because you have to keep in mind that in an industry like coal, you have bosses telling employees, if the Democrat wins, we're going out of business and you won't have a job.
Leading up to elections, you can notice it here, they'll lay off workers for 2 to 3 months before the election just to make things tighter economically and put the fear. Well, we're doing it because we don't know who's going to win. Joe Biden gets in there, we might have to cut production down to, whatever levels.
Yeah.
And they scare them in these very real ways. They hurt them economically to extract that vote from them,
or just get them to not vote in some cases.
Yeah. No, and they'll do to the people who have the money, that means nothing. Cut people off for a few months, hey, we get what we want from them. But to those people who are cut off, that's everything. And if they're in their mind, it's a Democrat who caused that, because it's not their boss.
And let's remember,
it's the politicians.
Let's remember that when the leaders of coal miners unions endorse Republicans, it's not the workers in the coal mines endorsing that Republican. It's union suits endorsing that Republican, because if they feel like if coal mining goes away, their power in the union goes away, because there's no need for a coal miners union. There aren't any coal mines.
Right, because a lot of the times what they always want to talk about is like, well, you got to prioritize coal miners and giving them jobs, which is great. Do it. Let's find out what other industries we could be branching out into, because
let's also prioritize giving them their paychecks. Remember all those coal miners in Kentucky who had to protest for months to get paid?
Right. No, miners are treated terribly. It's one of the most dangerous jobs. They go in there putting their lives on the line and they don't get the profits. It's not like they take a lot of the risk and get very little of the reward. And that's exactly what it's exploitation is what's going on here, like I said before. And, it's, I kind of lost my train of thought there with what I was going for, but yeah, it's just, it's what happens in West Virginia. It's what happens everywhere. But with Joe Manchin, it's like they have this idea that he's there for them and that these other people are there for them because it feels right or whatever, but it's not reality. And these people who would actually stand up for him have been vilified by those other individuals. And a lot of these people just go along with it. And those are the people who are politically minded. For every one of them, there's probably 3-4 other ones who just don't get involved whatsoever. So it's a really, like I said, I think that this area is primed for somebody who's organized to come in and really. So like one of the things that we did with Mary Ann Claytor is we got her on the coal mines in the southern coal fields, we got the coal miners to support her. And
Sure.
She was put on several coal mine slates that went out to the coal miners as the candidate that they should pick in the primary. And that's where we dominated, basically. That's where we won. So the support of the workers in a lot of cases is worth more than the support of the union, because I think that a lot of these workers understand that the union is not, it's sure it works for them, whatever, blah, 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 but it doesn't really. And if you've ever been to a union endorsement, if you've ever gone through the union endorsement process or newspapers, I mean, the whole endorsement process is just
best
crushing.
Example I can think of is still in 2020 when the culinary union, which is the most powerful union in the city of Las Vegas, endorsed a non-Medicare for all candidate and came out against Medicare for all, and yet their voters, their rank and file turned out for Bernie Sanders, who won the state of Nevada.
Right. There's a split between the management of unions and the workers, from my experience. And you see that happen all the time, where the union reps or the people who are the board, whoever, I don't know who makes the decision for the endorsements. I always hated this process.
This is my favorite story. So Cecil Roberts' great grandmother was Ma Blizzard, who was literally Mother Jones' sidekick in Colorado in the Great Mining Wars. Battle of Ludlow stuff.
Right. And so that legacy is
Cecil Roberts is a tool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Through and through. He was supposed to, the UMWA did endorse Mary Ann Claytor, both in the general in 2016 and in the primary and general for 2020. But, they're not based out of West Virginia. And we knew somebody who knew Cecil, and he was supposed to do something for us, like all this talk. Yeah. I want to get something out to the miners, something from me. Nothing. Nothing. And so I know who these people are, all who they are for what they can get out of it. And that's kind of the main thing to me that people have to realize. And even your favorite politician, probably, you have to pressure them, because left to their own devices, they're going to go for what benefits them the most.
So
and worry about you secondary.
Even Bernie Sanders got his best work done as mayor of Burlington by getting small business owners or even corporations to pay for his social programs on the theory that it would be good for their business. So even when you're talking about Bernie Sanders being successful as mayor of Burlington, you're talking about a very middle class sort of socialism where he got companies to step up and do things that they knew they would benefit from because it wouldn't really cost that much and they weren't being taxed anyway. And so this was a good way to, if they did this, it would be a good way to avoid local taxes, that sort of thing. And
right.
That's great. But that also shows the limits of even Bernie Sanders, who, since we were talking about our favorite politicians.
And that was always one of the things that bothered me with the whole Bernie Sanders thing, was we are almost there talking about the problems with capitalism, but it wasn't quite all the way there. And I think that just kind of, I don't know. I don't think you're going to inspire. I mean, he did inspire a lot of people. I'm not going to take that away from him. There was a great movement that rose up in that moment, almost took the nomination in 2016, almost took it in 2020. It was impressive, to be honest, but there was always that part of me that was just disappointed in his messaging. It's like, he can clearly see what the real evils are and what the real problems are, but he always goes just short of saying that we need to eliminate those. Let's
let's take a look. This is a great example of the limitations of working within the system, is Bernie Sanders' career. Bernie Sanders started as a member of a Democratic Socialist Party in Vermont called the Liberty Union. The Liberty Union still exists. They have a local newspaper for Vermont. They hate Bernie Sanders, who they feel is a reactionary who betrayed socialism. And they're very aggressive in their positions, which are significantly to the left of anything in the Democratic Party. Now, this is still an upper middle class democratic socialist group that could be what Lenin called socialism without the working class. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a radical group that thinks Bernie Sanders is a liberal and a sellout. Now, Bernie Sanders made the decisions that he made because he believed, right or wrong, that the Liberty Union was an organization that was only active during elections and was not doing what it needed to do between elections to build up any sort of actual power to win them. So he left the Liberty Union and ran as an independent in a situation where he was really pitching himself as this sort of oddball idea to a certain class of the petty bourgeois who did not feel served by either Republicans or Democrats. And they elected him mayor of Burlington eventually. And from there, he got into Congress eventually. He got into the Senate eventually. But Bernie as mayor was not the Liberty Union Bernie. Bernie in Congress was not Mayor Bernie. Because remember, even as Mayor Bernie, he went to Nicaragua to hang out with the Sandinistas in an international solidarity program. But with all that in mind, I mean, he was still easily the most progressive person in government. And that's kind of disappointing when that's the best we can do. And at the same time, I will always have a soft spot for Bernie that's not going to go away, no matter how disappointed I am in Bernie.
No, I get that statement. I supported Bernie wholeheartedly in 2020 through the primary up until the Tara Reid stuff and him dropping out. But that was even with somebody close to me who had several interactions with Bernie in the political sphere, who basically told me this guy's not super nice, and I don't think he's I don't think he's going to help us out here. And he didn't. So but I was like, listen, I can understand that you can't do everything. So he wasn't super nice to you. He was dismissive of you. All these things can be true, but he's still probably the best candidate that the Democrats have the possibility of nominating. So I'm going to go out there and do everything I can to help him in that primary. So that's what I did.
Plus, I mean, and I don't mean this, well, I do mean this up to a point. I mean, a lot of the people who talk about Bernie Sanders not being very nice are career Democratic Party or career media people who, they haven't given him any reason to be nice to them.
I will say, I hate to talk about people, but the person I'm talking about definitely isn't that. And she's a black woman.
I understand.
It's clearly Mary Ann Claytor, but but she had a meeting with him.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. And so like the whole thing was, she felt like
he won't support anyone the Democratic Party isn't willing to let him support unless he thinks they're going to win. He's very stingy.
It was at a rally for something that she was like included on some panel, and they had a meeting, and he was just kind of dismissive. because she had it was, so, I don't want to talk about too much about it, but it was just one of those things where she's like, I'm telling you, she said to me, she said, he's not the guy you think he is all the way. I'm telling you. She goes,
I believe that.
He's a successful, it was basically like this. He's a successful politician. He's a senator. It's not the down home Bernie that you think it is. And I'm well, I totally get that. I totally get that. It wasn't like he's a terrible person or anything along those lines. It was just like, this isn't, we had an Our Revolution endorsement, and it was just kind of like, that was a solidifying deal that there wasn't going to be a lot of support coming in despite all of that. And it was just kind of like, move on. So and despite all of that,
and I know exactly what you're talking about, because there was a pro Bernie candidate in San Diego, California, who was passed over for endorsement by Bernie in favor of a candidate who had not been pro Bernie prior to being endorsed by Bernie.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I just think that there's a lot of, you can't go off of personal feelings with a lot of these things either. I understand that. So like I said, that's why I still in 2020 was out there. I had a podcast that I did with that one guy I was telling you about, Alex, the troll who would definitely spend $11 for Elon to boost his tweets. And at one point we were getting 10,000 listeners a week. I mean, it wasn't super big, but it wasn't nothing either. And we did this solidly for a year. Didn't monetize anything. It was never about, even promoting anything of ourselves. I didn't even have Twitter. Like I just got Twitter a little while here ago. And it was just something that we did because we really believed we could do something to help keep Bernie's name out there and boost it amongst people. And so that's what we did. It's not a cult of personality. It was about policy, and it always was. And that's what people need to get back to. So my point is, maybe I personally wasn't, I didn't think Bernie was the best person, but I thought that he was the best candidate. And I really worked hard for that candidate. And I'm, I don't have any regrets, so to speak, but I do recognize him for what he is. And, it's like you said, though, I do have that soft place because there was, for that brief period, there was real hope that there was a movement forming in this country that was going to fight back against both of these corporate interest parties. It was like Obama came in whenever I was my first election, and it was like, this guy is really going to do something. And then by 2010, it's like, that's dashed. It's gone. I had no hope.
He shamed Amazon into paying its employees $15 an hour.
Right. No, and so there are people out there who may not be perfect. This is the other thing that always gets to me is like, there are people out there who would rather I align myself with Nazis than with a moderate Democrat or Republican who doesn't agree with me all the time. Like, those people maybe don't want to kill me.
I mean, it's like,
and that's better,
But here's the thing. Why is it an either or? Why does not wanting to align with Nazis mean I want to align with Democrats?
That's fair. I got you. That's fair.
Because I am very critical of Democrats. I am very outspoken in my belief that we need a third party. I was willing to support Paula's involvement with the Movement for a People's Party, even though I have never been a supporter of the Movement for a People's Party, because I thought it was important that someone whose name people knew was talking about third parties.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that we need a third party. I think that we don't have any one third party that's great. I think ultimately, if we can't build a new party, then what we need is a united front among groups left of the Democrats, even if they aren't willing to really work together too much beyond a few core issues. We still need a united front in order to get people left of the Democrats into office, first at a local level, then at a state level, and then at a federal level. And at the same time, we need to be organizing communities to support strikes, to provide mutual aid, to provide mutual defense, to watch the cops, all of this stuff. One of the best models, I think, right now is the People's City Council in Los Angeles. I think every town in the country should have a People's City Council, and every county in the country should have an equivalent.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you said. Like I said, I'm not a Democratic Party person other than I'm in the Democratic Party. And you're never going to hear me defend the structure of it, the leadership of it, anything to do with it other than to say, I want to agitate and try to make a difference and change some minds of people who are involved in party politics. It's like West Virginia. There are good people in West Virginia that may be getting passed over. There are good people in the Democratic Party who need to be exposed to people like me, Marianne Clater, whoever it is, to say you don't have to do things the way that they're doing things. You can be opposed to the GOP and to the right wing. You could stay a Democrat if you really want to, but you have to be for these fundamental changes that have to happen if we're going to ever do anything different than what the status quo is. If we're ever going to make a change, a difference in people's lives that's noticeable, it's going to take major changes that neither one of these parties is going to support. But it doesn't mean the rank and file Democrats, they're fair game. They're listening, waiting for the opportunity for change.
The rank and file Democrats support all this stuff that their politicians won't let them have. I mean, that's what the numbers say.
I really do blame a lot of this on the sports mentality that we've allowed to take over our political discourse.
Yes.
Don't underestimate that this is my team, so they can't do any wrong. That's what a lot of people believe whenever they discuss
But at the
politics.
same time, there are a lot of people who aren't willing to vote Democrat because of that. And Bernie had that support in 2016 and lost it by supporting Hillary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was a major mistake.
Whoops, that's the wrong one. And Paula brings up a good point. This is actually a good time to remember that it's after Seth's bedtime, too. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great night. I will be back next week with Walker Bragman. And I hope everybody has a great week until then. We'll tweet at you.